This is Christopher Perotto, a 22-year-old son who had a dream of playing the MLB after he graduated college. This same son was the heart of his household, but his life was brutally taken away after an opioid overdose. His mother, Anne Marie, found him laying dead on an empty parking lot, and her husband's life was forever changed. Christopher is one of the over 456,000 others who died from an opioid overdose since the turning of the century. The opioid epidemic has claimed multiple lives and destroyed many families, but a solution has finally appeared. Narcan, or naloxone, is a medicine that fastly reverses an opioid overdose. It is an opioid antagonist. This means that it targets opioid receptors and blocks and reverses their effects. The impacts of naloxone accessibility during the U.S. opioid epidemic. I'm Stuti Vasquez.
I'm Eliana Cordero.
I'm Jeff Munoz.
I'm Stephen Abraham.
And my name is Haisa Haval. The U.S. opioid epidemic stands as a unique drug crisis, as the drugs that are circulating are as potent as ever, and they are being laced into more normal drugs, such as vapes and cocaine. Naloxone could have saved Christopher's lives and hundreds and thousands of others. So, when faced with the question, has the distribution rate of naloxone been an effective measure in controlling death during the American opioid epidemic? Unfortunately, due to the lack of funding and pharmaceutical corruption, naloxone distribution has not been effective enough as it could be.
Going back to Heise's point on lack of funding, that lack of funding has resulted in a lack of supply for first responders. As you can see here, naloxone, or Narcan, begins its journey with the manufacturer and down to the distributor, which will then see Narcan or naloxone distributed among physicians, doctors, or other medical departments. However, this misses the main point of it getting distributed to first responders who are in dire need of it with the increasing number of opioid overdoses in the United States. As you can see here, by quote the American Journal of Public Health, naloxone or Narcan has been issued to law enforcement officers who are now seeing more calls for opioid overdoses in order to help supplement the first responders like paramedics or firefighters who need the support of law enforcement in order to help reverse overdoses. Now, across the United States, states need to meet a quota of at least an 80% witness overdose in order to save the lives of those people. However, in states like Illinois, they're below that quota, falling behind with hundreds of thousands of kits being unable to save those lives. As you can see here, with metropolitan areas such as Dallas or majority of Florida, although they have kits, it is simply not enough to match their big population and with a daily increasing amount of opioid overdoses in those areas.
The second issue is that Big Pharma blockades naloxone. This visual here shows us how during the years 2006 through 2017, there's been a steady increase in the price of naloxone for all dosage types. This proves the fact that naloxone prices have been tampered with in the past for the sake of raising business values instead of distributing the drug to save lives. Situations like this have led to medical fraud, where patients have frequently overdosed and had no choice but to buy naloxone, and this profits the people initiating this reinforcing cycle. However, the pharma solution to opioids is more opioids. Despite over 9 million doses of naloxone being available in 2018, only 557,000 of them were actually dispensed. Moreover, 6 out of 10 critical patients were only prescribed more opioids. This fact is further proven with a quote regarding John Kapoor, an executive member of the INSYS pharmaceutical company. Despite increasing public fears over the drug epidemic fueled by painful prescriptions, these defendants, led by Kapoor, flowed ahead, setting weekly quotas on doctors' payrolls, urging them to prescribe subsidies in higher and higher doses, all for the sake of raising profits out of patients' expense. The medical industry, when combined with the tactics of business insiders, leads to greed and corruption, and the cost of this is the loss of many lives. When patients have no choice but to use opioids for issues like chronic pain, then it is the doctor's responsibility to ensure that their patient is aware of the risk of addiction and provides them with the necessary resources like naloxone to ensure their safety and well-being. This graph here represents the results from a study conducted in Texas measuring whether pharmacies had naloxone sprays for at least a week's worth. The study included a random sample of 800 out of 5,078 pharmacies licensed with the Texas State Board of Pharmacy. The results significantly indicated that chain pharmacies had enough naloxone for a week compared to independent pharmacies. However, an overarching finding was that most pharmacies in Texas weren't willing to dispense naloxone due to their personal beliefs against opioid overusers. When people dealing with a life-saving drug let their emotions come in the way of their work, then they're letting more people struggle with opioid overuse and eventually letting them die.
As Jevin had stated before, the most important solution to the opioid epidemic is bringing naloxone to front lines. And one of the best ways we can do this is supplying community programs with naloxone. But they are simply going out of order. Now, what do community programs do? They operate under the philosophy of harm reduction, which focuses on limiting the potency of drugs. Now, they actually supply drugs to users, but instead of heroin and fentanyl, they supply them with methadone and naloxone. Methadone being a drug that helps people withdraw from opioids overall through syringe service programs, which also supply clean needles. Now, the supply of clean needles and good drugs have led to a 50% prevention rate of HIV in California and a 92% decreased chance of overdose overall in that metropolitan area. Furthermore, as we can see by this graph, when California made a huge policy change in 2008 to make syringe service programs statewide, we saw a huge drop in the amount of opioid overdose in their state by the thousands, according to Biomed Central Public Health. And furthermore, when methadone and naloxone distribution was increased through syringe service programs, we saw a huge drop in heroin overdose deaths marked by this red line right here. So if all of these programs are succeeding, then why are they going out of order? Well, it's because of politics. Let's take the example of Kanawha Charleston SSP in West Virginia. They were launched in 2015, and by 2018 they were serving 400 drug users weekly, which was a huge success. But then politics got involved, where they had the agenda of showing that crime was an issue they were fighting against, therefore drug use an issue they were fighting against. And they categorized these programs as needle mills and junkie central. The point is that politicians put these areas completely out of order by 2021 when they signed Bill 334, which put a licensing program and heavy restrictions that made syringe service programs like Kanawha Charleston go out of order like it is today. Take the quote from Mayor Danny Jones of Charleston, where he said that he understood recovery, but didn't see it as a solution. But what Mr. Jones doesn't understand is that Kanawha County is not only leading in HIV deaths, which is solved by having clean needles, but is also one of the leading counties in opioid overuse, as shown by this map of the top 100 leading counties in opioid overuse across America. It is simple fraud that these politicians are taking away from proper solutions, like bringing more naloxone and bringing it to the front lines.
So when it comes to ensuring naloxone is effective in preventing more opioid deaths, the main solution is to increase distribution. Here's some different ways we can do that. Is place legal protections, not restrictions. As Stephen just said, syringe service programs, which are also known as SSPs, have a history of being outlawed, despite their success in preventing more deaths from opioid overdose. We need to remove these restrictions, and we also need to put laws into place that actually protect these programs so they can continue to serve their community. We also need to decentralize naloxone. So not only should naloxone be funded federally, but we need to move these funds, we need to allocate them into smaller subsections, like state and local governments. This would allow for naloxone to be distributed more efficiently and to those who need it. It would be distributed more efficiently to those who need it. We should also be cross-checking the producers of opioids. So opioid medications should be verified before going to the patients to ensure that addiction is less of a possibility. Ultimately, distribution should be increased. While these are things that are underway that improve the issue of increasing the distribution of naloxone, we also need to consider aspects that may slow this down. We need to consider enforcement difficulty. So preventing more deaths will take time and money. The United States is a very large country. There's no immediate fix to all of this. Like I said, time and money. We also need to consider stigma. Opioid addiction and addiction in general is a very heavy topic. Addicts who may need naloxone in the future, even if there are sources available for them to get naloxone, they may not take advantage of this because of the taboo they face as an addict. And we also have to consider overwhelmed local markets. Some areas will have a higher demand than others.
Proper distribution requires a proper program to do so. And if America keeps avoiding this issue, then we're going to see more people die every day. But the first step of solving getting a solution is understand the problem. Thank you.
Here are our works cited. Thank you for watching. Any questions?
Let's scoot together. Let's scoot together. Let's stay backed up. All right, I forgot to shuffle beforehand, so I shuffled while you were speaking. I hope that's okay. We'll start and move that direction, okay? Oh gosh, all right, first up, let's go. All right, Stephen, give me a specific way that your thinking changed as a result of Riza's findings.
Yeah. So Haisa's perspective was on medical professionals, and she actually found that naloxone and Narcan can also be used as an anesthetic in the medical world, and it also has further validation from medical professionals who use it on a daily. So supply is not only effective in preventing opioid overdoses, but also making naloxone a bigger drug because it is, as it was quoted by medical professionals, a miracle drug. So it needs to get more supply.
All right, thank you. Next up, what's a way in which your team's solution makes you think differently about the research you did?
So my team's solution with the increasing of more programs for the distribution of naloxone makes me think a bit about how typically people fall back, oh, give the government more money and maybe they'll solve the issue. But this provides a clear goal as to, hey, if we increase the programs instead of increasing the funding, giving the government money, because in cases like Kennesaw County, where they got those programs and they shut it down, it was a waste of money. So if we increase the programs like that, then that changes my solution of throwing money at it.
Thank you. Next up, if you had another team member, 6, what perspective or limitation could they have reached that would have made a useful contribution to the project?
If we had another perspective, I think it would have been interesting to have that of an addict or someone who has suffered from addiction of opioids. It would add a lot to having their perspective on increasing naloxone would add a lot to our presentation.
All right. Next up, reflecting on your colleagues' work, which one had the greatest impact on your understanding of the problem?
For me, the one that had the greatest impact on understanding of the problem was Jevin, because my perspective was of medical responders and he was the first responders. So when our arguments correlated that there was not enough naloxone to distribute to everyone.
All right. And last up, what is an example of a compelling argument from one of your peers' reports that you decided to not include in the presentation and why?
A compelling argument from Haisa's report that we decided to exclude was that emergency support groups were actually doing a great job of using naloxone and targeting opioid overdoses in many states like Massachusetts and Texas. But the reason we decided to exclude that is because our main argument was focused on how we needed more naloxone, and this wouldn't occur if these programs wouldn't be successful without enough naloxone. So that is why our argument focuses on increasing